I'd like to go ahead and kick off our next speaker. It's cultivating resilient students. Universities often ask the question, what can be done on campus to purposefully cultivate resiliency among our student body? This session will discuss how mobile app Thrive at UT has been developed to foster the well-being of students throughout the University of Texas system. It's my pleasure to introduce Elana Bizer, who's with the Integrated Health Team Leader and Technology Initiatives Coordinator with the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just want to thank the presenters again for inviting me to talk on this topic. It's my first ACHA event and really have enjoyed the conversations we're having so far and really hope to be able to contribute to this one in a meaningful way. And so everyone in the room here is well aware of the growing incidence of depression and anxiety on our college campuses. That's obviously a big reason that we're here today. And to date, we've really focused mostly on helping students by treating them in our counseling and medical centers. And then over the past decade or so, been more engaged in prevention and outreach efforts to target specific behaviors such as substance abuse or relationship violence. But lately, as we've been talking about today, more research is showing the benefit of really increasing student resilience so that students can manage the ups and downs of campus life that are unforeseen. And so, as Mary explained to us before, resilience is essentially the capacity to bounce back from challenges and setbacks. And when students go to campus for the first time and leave home, they encounter many of them. So they may encounter some new challenges, like making friends where maybe previously in high school they knew everybody, or they may have to deal with challenges on their own where previously they had a lot of family support, things like time management. And so students show up on our campuses with really varying amounts of resilience, but the good news is that this is really something that we can help them work on during the time that they're with us. So the American Psychological Association talks about different skills that individuals really can engage in order to build resilience. These are things like making social connections, better managing difficult moods, and developing a more kinder view of oneself. Again, things that we've been talking about today. As a behavioral health counselor, these are things I've always been working with students on, right? But the thing is that even though students grasp these concepts theoretically, resilience is really something that's learned through action and practice. And so mindfulness, for example, you can talk about mindfulness, you can read about it, you can share with students about it in counseling centers, but unless students are really practicing the techniques like meditation or breathing exercises, or as I learned today, tea making and tea tasting, you're really not going to be able to have them use that skill when they need it in life, because it's an experiential practice. And so in trying to lay the groundwork for this practice, I would often assign homework. But then the challenge there is students, with everything else going on in their lives, remembering to do it or doing it consistently. So I became aware of really the limitations of counseling, especially in the brief settings that we operate in. So before going back to grad school to become a clinical social worker, I was a website editor. And so as I thought about what are some ways that we can build resilience, I kept coming back to technology. How could we use technology? And then the obvious solution seemed like a mobile phone app, right? Like we talked about, right? That's what the way students are really engaging information these days. That's a new place to meet them where they're at. The other thing about phones is that because they always have them with them, it's a great opportunity to begin to interrupt their usual way of doing things, to begin to replace old habits with new ones. And since they have such a personal relationship with their phones, this type of emotional strengths building kind of makes sense. So that brings us to Thrive at UT. So after convincing our center director that this would be a good idea, and more importantly, securing the funds for it because apps are expensive to build, the first thing we did was set about finding out what students would be likely to use and what they would want in such an app. And just to say, we did focus groups, we had our peer educators involved in all of our initial brainstorm and development meetings, but then because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just designing something that was for students who already were using our services, already aware of mental health issues, I had our graduate students actually just go out onto campus and randomly stop students as they were waiting for a bus, as they were on their way to class, to really find out what would they ideally want in an app, what would they be likely to use, what are things that they're working to build as far as their own resilience. Meanwhile, it also seemed essential that whatever we build be designed in a way where we're not getting students to spend more time on their phones. We certainly don't need that, but really using the app as a platform to get them to re-engage in their lives. And so, since so many factors underlie resilience, as we've talked about, again, it felt important to ask students what is meaningful for them? What are things that they're wanting to build in their lives? What are things that they're wanting to learn more about? And so we also looked at what also makes sense to offer in an app, right? Where do we feel we can actually create some learning? And so with all of that, these are the topics we came up with as ones where we thought we could develop some good, concrete, helpful skills. So with community, which we've talked a lot about today, it's the idea in this section that all types of relationships are important. I think people are often focused on making new connections, but also the realization that it's important to have the students that you can go into a class and be able to just say hi to. That might be the only connection you need from them, but then people that you socialize with, have groups that you're organized around, and then have the deeper relationships where you can really share your thoughts and emotions. And so in this section, we not only talk about the importance of all these relationships, but we also give real concrete skills for how do you do things like go up to somebody and introduce yourself and make small talk, or get to a deeper level in that relationship. With moods, we were looking at really helping students regulate difficult, even positive emotions, but be able to really recognize their emotions and then be able to figure out how to manage them. And so we used a lot of DBT skills in this section, which has a lot of concrete things like, things like underlying sleep, but also being able to, in the moment, do things to regulate one's mood. So mindfulness, obviously self-explanatory, but tried to take it from a lens of what a student would find useful, both in terms of how mindfulness can be effective in managing some of the daily challenges, but also what are ways that make sense to practice it as a student. Thoughts, we looked at recognizing and challenging thought distortion, so using a lot of CBT work to help students begin to even recognize that sometimes their thoughts aren't always facts. Self-compassion, again, we talked about this earlier, the understanding that helping students recognize how are they talking to themselves and how can they develop a kinder way of being with themselves. Mindset borrows heavily from the work of Carolyn Dweck around recognizing that failure and disappointment and rejection are all parts of life, something that some of our students haven't really come to grips with until they actually get to campus. And then gratitude, it felt important to be able to kind of borrow this from positive psychology to recognize that even when things aren't going well, because we want to mirror that sometimes they aren't, there's still things that might be helpful to appreciate and acknowledge in those moments. And then for the new release of our app this fall, we introduced purpose as a module. And this was because I was recognizing that more and more students are having difficulty with motivation. And as we kind of unpack that, it seems like a lot of that is because they're not really feeling very engaged in what they're doing. And so sometimes some of these students haven't even been able to ask that question of like, what do they find meaningful or purposeful? So this section allows them to begin to look at that both academically and personally. And so it's important to say we involve students at every aspect of development, which turned out to be really important because the truth is they didn't like some of our initial ideas. And what I learned is that students wanted things that were very content light and small bites, which might be why a lot of students don't engage in a lot of the other apps for very long. They wanted something where they can go in for 2 minutes, learn something, get out, then come back in 2 minutes, and then be able to slip right back in and continue whatever they're working on. They also wanted really simple concepts, and they wanted concrete tools. And so with all of that in mind, we designed a really brief but varied engagement for each of these topics that goes like this. So we start off with an inspirational quote, and students told us they like inspirational quotes, and this gives us a chance to kind of kick off the topic, but also create some very exciting visuals. Next, we have these mini documentaries. And so what's lovely about this, these are actual student stories of students talking about challenges that they've overcome since being a student. And so the idea here is to normalize the topic and to have students talk about the topic instead of us talking about the topic. And the way that we did this came about in a very lovely way. We just asked students if they've overcome a challenge on campus and would like to share it with others. And so again, we didn't try to pigeonhole them into telling a specific story, but really as we talked to them for a half an hour, certain themes emerged, and then as we distilled the topic down to 2 minutes, we were able to orient them around these topics. Next comes the psychoeducation. So this was the part that students had a lot of pushback on, but they didn't want a lot of words about what's happening, but I said, but there's no other way to explain it but to explain it. So this is like kind of 750 to 1,000 of most essential things to know about the topic, along with really concrete strategies. And for the students who didn't want to read it, we actually have students reciting it so that they can click on the audio button and just have it read to them. Next comes the interactive activity. And so at this point, students are introduced to the topic. They've heard about it from friends, or I should say the mini documentary, and now they're able to kind of plug themselves into it. So these are different activities where they can start to see how does this relate to them specifically. And so in the thoughts module, we have a quiz where students can begin to look at how they might respond in different scenarios, and then afterwards it'll tell them what thought distortions they might be engaging in. In the mindset, or I should say that's the moods module, there's a slider where they can kind of rate where they are on the intensity of different emotions, and then they are given some practical skills that they can practice to see are those helpful in the moment. Next, they're reminders. So the interaction in the app is pretty short, but the idea here is that afterwards, they have some themes around what are ways to grow in this area, and they can sign up for 1, 2, or all 3 of the different reminders, and then they'll receive daily reminders every day that are kind of micro interventions where they can reflect on something that they've maybe recently done, look at something or plan for something that'll happen, in the next seconds, minutes, hours, or just kind of be able to look and think about something in a different way. So resources is another section. The idea that, again, it's a small engagement in the app. But if students are interested, here are places they can go on the internet to learn more about the topic. There are places on campus we direct them to be able to find out, how to, for example, in community, if they want to learn more about student organizations, they can click through here and then they can find out the list of different student organizations on campus. And then lastly, this is just brand new, we just introduced it last week, we have our new version has student stories, which kind of similar to the mini documentaries, we have an area where students can go and share their stories about how they may have dealt with this challenge and what has been helpful for them. And so I want to circle back to the notifications because this is really the key part of the app. The engagement in the app, like I said, students didn't want a lot of content. We didn't give them a lot of content. And so the notifications are really where a lot of the work happens. And so most therapeutic interventions rely on students to remember to engage in them, which doesn't work so well, as we all know. But with these daily reminders, they're really responding to prompts that they receive throughout the day. And since they're not compartmentalized from their lives, but intersecting them, it creates these new opportunities. And also, because these are areas that they selected, there's also a level of buy-in that they wouldn't have with some other things that you might foist upon them. And so the way we're looking at them these are small changes. I wrote them as kind of very small asks that are not going to be too intimidating when they show up on your phone, that you could do them, reflect on them for a few seconds, or make a commitment to do them, in another hour or so. And yet, as small as they are, day after day after day, they add up to some real change. And so with this last, notification, I have a personal story of something that really helped me understand how the app can be helpful. I was working with a student, and I'd probably been seeing her for about 6 weeks, 8 weeks, for biweekly counseling, and she was suffering from tremendous depression, and a lot of it was just exacerbated by her negative self-talk. And we would talk about it in the session, and she would be able to acknowledge how she's not being accurate, she's not being kind, she really wants to develop a different relationship with herself, and next time she comes back, she's going to do something different. But of course, inevitably, because it's hard to change behavior, she would come back, and again, dealing with a lot of the same negative self-talk. Until one day she came back to the office and she said, I was coming back from an exam. I didn't do as well as I had hoped I would do. And then I was really berating myself, and this notification came across my screen. And in that moment, I was able to really see what I'm doing to myself and how it's not helpful. And she said that pivotal, few second experience kind of just really changed the trajectory. It's not that she stopped talking to herself that way, but it's that she was able now to have an awareness that then did translate into some different behaviors. And so the nice thing about Thrive is that counselors can, hold on. Counselors can recommend it to students as homework because it's very concrete. We have RAs who can promote it to new students as a tool for student success. And then peers can feel comfortable promoting it on social media. The idea is that it's not a mental health app. It's an app for resilience, for well-being, and it's really seen as kind of like a strengths-building app that no matter where you are on the continuum, here's some skills you can work on to grow in that area. And so we promote it on campus as really an app for everyone with the idea of it's really targeted to live your best life. And so student feedback has been tremendous. And so this is an in-app survey that we do, and we found that 95% of the users surveyed said that to some degree the app is helping them improve their well-being, and 96% would recommend it to a friend. And then I just shared two of the many feedback quotes that we get from students talking about how they find it helpful or what it's, the change it's made in their lives. And so about a year and a half ago, we received funding to expand the app to be able to put it finally on an Android platform and also to be able to offer it to the other UT system campuses, there's 14 of us. And so this app actually just launched last week. We're excited about it, and now we're going to be able to offer the app to 216,000 students. And one of the nice things is we built the app in a way where there's a lot more kind of, even though it's all anonymous, serving and reporting around usage and what's helpful. So we're hoping to learn what's helpful not only to build things into the app, but able to also look at what are some new program ideas we can develop. And so just in conclusion, just to say, I feel like since developing this app, we're really able to extend the work that we do in our counseling and medical centers into students' daily lives. And by doing this, I feel like we're not just helping them heal from things that have happened in their lives or just the day-to-day challenges, but really preparing them to manage the things that might happen in the future and to be able to bounce back from them. So at this point, I will take any questions that you might have.
One of the questions that came in was, do students in recovery utilize the app?
So because it's completely an anonymous app, we don't know. People don't necessarily disclose what might be bringing them into the app or some of their concerns, but it's really developed for anyone. So the idea is that it's done in a way where anyone could feel that they could relate to the topics. So I'm sorry I don't have more information specific to that. Okay.
All right, excellent work and another. Oh, sorry, there's another question. Yes, what's your question? Okay, so the question is just because we have folks online. So how long did it take to build and what was the budget? So about 2.5 years and 200,000 all in, right? Roughly? Yeah, okay. If you put your questions in sli.do, and then what we'll do is we'll give them to our speakers and we'll have them answer them and we'll post them on the website. So if we don't get to your questions, go ahead and post them online and we still will make sure that we have them.